great scientist somewhere once observed that the brain is unable to distinguish between what it remembers and what it actually sees in reality. This scientist hooked their participant up to an electroencephalogram, an EEG machine, to observe just what took place on a visual level in the brain when one is shown an object, in this case, an orange. The results was very clear. A particular part of the brain lit up. It started firing. But what was more astonishing is what the scientist discovered when he removed that orange from view and asked the participant to envision that orange. The same part of the brain lit up as if they were actually looking at that orange, which kind of makes you think, is reality what we conjure with our minds, or is reality what we see with our eyes? I think it's safe to say that most of us probably don't ever have to get that philosophical. But I do. And it's because I'm a dreamer. And for dreamers, conjuring a reality is part of our mind. Conjuring our reality in our mind is part of what makes us tick. Imagining a better life is the fabric of our lives. Everything has to be imagined, dreamed, if I may, and from that, woven into our existence. I'm going to take you back to where that dream began, back to an early 80s in a small town called Garvamead in Jamaica, West Indies. I remember at around 5:30 every morning, my sister, father, and I would stand in the front yard facing the town square to see my mom go off to work. She was a self-taught seamstress who didn't have the opportunity to go to college. She made a living buying materials abroad, making clothing for the local population. My father, a college graduate, he found his success as a timekeeper at a local wharf. Once my father would get home, I would recall jumping on his back, and we'd run all the way through the house, up and down, back and forth, excited to see each other. My mother looked on in elation. My days were great, and for moments like that, my nights were even better. For me, all was well. My view of life was unobstructed. A future with unbounded possibilities. A doctor, a lawyer, a successful entrepreneur, maybe even a physician. Everything was within reach. For my parents, it was vastly different. Their main concerns lied in shifting their present. The 70s in Jamaica was not a pretty place, nor was the 80s, and I'm an 80s baby, born in 1984. The worst global recession hit the year before I was born, actually, in Jamaica. A job my father once proudly held was no longer, and my mother began to travel more frequently to purchase foreign goods in efforts to gain and sell more products. What choices might they have faced? What's the limit for a mother with a hungry child? What's the limit for a mother whose child's future is in question? Limit? There is no limit. In pursuit of happiness, my mother suggested to my father a change of scenery. I recall being taken to my aunt's home in Portmore, Jamaica. It was here that I would spend the next couple of years without my parents, who had immigrated to the United States. I recall a perfume case that my mom had. I would play with all day due to me being fascinated with this item. On her last day, before she left for the States, I recall her leaving me this case. I used this perfume case as a toy spaceship, most important, a keepsake for my mother. Of course, I had felt abandoned, but I can't imagine what my parents probably felt having that difficult, if not impossible, decision to make, or the sacrifice they were willing to make. A few years passed before I would see my parents again. From my aunt's house, I moved to my sister's in Jamaica at around the age of 7. Shortly thereafter, I moved to the States. Now being with my parents, I would say this became the most important and significant time of my life, the best moment of my life. I had a mom and dad that showed me endless love in a land with just as much excitement as mystery. Unfortunately, this joyous phase wouldn't last. Dad would die a year after my arrival from throat cancer, leaving my mom the sole fender for the family, always away at work, always striving to realize the American dream. This was the period of time where I would develop my sense of freedom. Mom was away, so I immersed myself in culture and customs surrounding me. My previously held identity escaped my grasp. I didn't hear reggae as much anymore. Instead, I heard rap and hip-hop. My accent was a point of attention for other kids, so I quickly learned to speak as they did. The meals in the cafeteria were different. Instead of a Jamaican cuisine of rice and curry chicken, I had a sloppy joe or a delicious cheeseburger and pizza. Basketball, not soccer, would become my favorite sport. I held my hand to my chest every morning and I recited, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Graduating elementary school, junior high school, and then high school. Here I would become school vice president, joined varsity and junior varsity, the basketball team, golf team, bowling team, and I attempted to join the baseball team, but I couldn't catch to save my life. I was not your exemplary A student, though I had a deep and profound respect, admiration for those students who were your typical A. I recognized that I, as a DACA recipient, did not have the desired support system. Through that, I discerned that if I was to make it after schooling, I'd need to select the appropriate role models and influencers. It wasn't until the last year of high school that I would become clear of what my options were or lack of options. I recall having those conversations with my mom, and mother would say, college? Why don't you seek a trade? You don't have any documentation to go to college. Don't worry about that. Now, in my ignorance and stubbornness, I'd still go out applying for colleges. I recall one person saying, were it intentional that you left out your social security number? At that point in time, I had never seen a social security card. My varsity coach asked me, what's my plans? What's your plans? I lied. Not only did I dodge scheduled basketball games and practice much of my last year, but I decided to say that I was going to leave the country after I graduated, simply because I was embarrassed and afraid to admit that without my documentation, I couldn't see a future. Certainly not in a place where these truths existed. Yet, to my friends, I was American. We shared the same struggles, same dreams. To my neighbors, I was American. We shared the same traditions, communities, and home. To my teacher and coaches, I was American. They instilled in me the American spirit of optimism, education, and value for growth. To my mom, I was hope. To her, I was an embodiment of a future of potential that both her and my father held before they left their homeland of Jamaica. A future and potential that in some ways I've realized. For me, a job was never the obvious answer. Beyond my inability to produce documentation, I was frequently met with statements like, hiring? Hiring? I'm still firing. Entrepreneurship would become my preferred method of sailing the seas of individual and country economic turbulence. After high school, I devoted myself to grassroots initiatives. I focused on getting the hard-to-employ employed, placing hundreds, if not thousands, to work locally in Brooklyn, New York. This experience would serve me purposefully, as thereafter I'd open my own niche security company, grow it in excess of $1 million, and then sell it in 2013 at the age of 29. I've worked with prominent up-and-coming tech companies, served in the financial industry, and assisted many of my friends in developing their brand identity. The true power of seeing is believing lived in my willingness to allow myself to dream, to see a future beyond what current legal bodies would institute. By now, I hope you've identified the similarities between dreamers and yourself. We're all dreamers. Thank you very much.